All right, welcome to today's conversation. I'm honored to have my friend John March with me. John and I go way back. We were roommates in our first year at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and we were even ordained in the same year in the same denomination. Over the years, we shared some meaningful experiences. We both served in the same church and college ministry at different times, and we even started a men's group together on campus, well, on our campus, right? And John, I don't know if you knew this, but you had a pretty significant influence on me in terms of shaping how I think about money and faith. Because I remember you grew up in a family that encouraged you to understand finances and investing, while I grew up in I grew up only hearing that money was the root of all evil, and but that shifted something in me, like
Mm.
learning about your family background, and now I see financial wisdom as an important and often overlooked part of discipleship.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and then John, I think you got married like 2 weeks before I did, which meant that we couldn't attend each other's weddings. And then I think later on you stepped into church planting, I stepped into church planting, and eventually when I was phasing out of church planting and beginning to discover spiritual direction, I learned that you already had become a spiritual director, and that encouraged me deeply because once again, our journeys seem to align. And I remember at the time, Eugene Peterson once said that three essential tasks for a pastor are praying, reading scripture, and giving spiritual direction. That last one caught me by surprise and made me wonder what I had missed all those years in ministry. So that curiosity has grown into a calling. And now I find myself asking why so many pastors are becoming spiritual directors and what wisdom this transition holds for the church. So here we are, starting that journey of exploration with my old roommate, fellow pastor, and friend, John March. So welcome, John.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for that introduction. And I didn't know that about the financial stuff. That's good to hear. That's fun to hear.
Yeah. So, would you be able to briefly share your journey into ministry? What first drew you to being a pastor or leader in the church?
Hmm. Um, so I grew up in the church, but kind of had like a dual life when I was younger, where I would be fairly active in the church and even be a leader in the church, but then kind of when I went out, as a lot of young people do, kind of living my own life. And I think when I got to college, I felt the tension
Mm,
of that duality of living two separate lives. And so it felt like I had to choose. And so I chose to walk away from the church. And so then spent my college years not engaged in the church really to any significant degree and felt pretty like broken. Actually felt very broken by the time I graduated from college but because I had this experience with God where my faith was a significant part of my life, felt like I wanted to kind of restart my life after I graduated. And so I moved to a place where I didn't really know many people
mm,
and decided that I was going to start over by trying to make all my social network happen through going to church. That was going to be where my friends were. So I found a big church in the Chicago area and got involved in the singles group and just really had a very transformative experience
mm,
and had a I think that was really the beginning of significant like mystical encounters, I would say, or very, very real personal encounters with Jesus. And that I think just pulled me towards wanting to pursue and follow Jesus. Initially, I think with this strong desire to just learn more. And so I was reading every theology book I could get, and I immediately wanted to go to seminary. but had no ministry, real significant ministry experience at that point. And so I was working as an engineer at the time, and so I quit my job and spent a year teaching seventh graders, among other things, in Malawi, Africa.
That's right.
And then after that, so that was sort of me trying out ministry and just giving myself a lot of space to put the personal relationship with the Lord first. And then after that, was able to go to seminary where I showed up just very hungry to learn more about Jesus. That, and I think that learning piece, I think by default, I had sort of that mystical encounter, but I think the way that the church was functioning was the way you got to know the Lord better was through kind of academic study. And so that was the way that I was kind of living out that desire at that time.
Yeah.
And but so that's really how I jumped into it. I didn't really know kind of long term what I wanted to do, I don't think. I think that while I was in seminary, I was like, do I want to be a missionary? Do I want to be a pastor? What, do I want to go get a PhD and try and be a professor? Like I was kind of shuffling through all those different options. It was really, I think that the initial desire was really just to know, to follow that personal encounter experience I had.
Yeah, all that memory is coming back. I'm thinking about at night, when we're before we fall asleep, we would have all those conversations, and then now I remember all those stories coming back.
Funny.
Yeah, but how did you so with that, and then you became a pastor, you planted church, and then now fast forward to today. At some point, you became a spiritual director. And so, how did you first encounter spiritual direction, and what drew you toward that?
So as you mentioned, I planted a church kind of right around the financial crisis, 2008, 2009. And I think we went public at the end of 2009 with our first public worship service. And then we went to weekly worship services in 2010. And not too long after that, I became aware that I was in over my head.
Mm,
My spiritual maturity was not, I was just not at a place to be able to handle the challenges that I was facing. And not even that I was facing, I wasn't even facing challenges that significant. They're pretty typical of ministry in general and church planning for sure, in particular. But just the disappointment.
mm,
I felt like, okay, I've given my life to you, God, and you're supposed to be here to help me. This is really hard, and I've kind of stepped out trusting that you would be there to make up for the places where I had lack. And I just felt like God was not living up to his end of the bargain. I felt like I had walked away from a lot to do this, and I really expected that things were going to go better and there was going to be more victory in it. And it was just really, really hard. And so I think coming face to face with that disappointment in God and then just the pain of things not going as well, the rejection, the criticism, not having people show up to events, not having people show up to service, staff quitting, struggling to hire new staff, conflict with leadership team members, just all the very normal stuff for ministry.
yeah.
I think there was a point where I was just kind of like, where are you, God? Like, this is not going well. And I was not reacting well to those things. And so at some point in time along the way, I had heard people recommending spiritual direction. And I think I was just at a place where I was feeling very desperate. And so that was what I did. I reached out to, there's a local ministry around here. I asked them to connect me with a spiritual director. They put me in contact with somebody, and I started meeting with that person. And through my time meeting with that person in spiritual direction, I think I came to a place where I discovered that my life could be going very poorly, kind of on the outside, but God could still be very active in my life.
Mm,
And spiritual direction was a place I think where I learned to discover that, and it just shifted everything for me.
yeah.
And so then for really the rest of my time, well, I mean, from then on, I've been meeting with a spiritual director regularly, but at first, it was almost every week or every other week. And because it was really just a lifeline for me to try and stay connected to God in the midst of doing something that I was just faced with so much pain and disappointment. So that was really how I first encountered and stepped into and discovered the how much life there was in spiritual direction. And then I don't know if you want me to keep going, but then at some point in time, I felt like I stepped into, getting trained for spiritual direction. And that was kind of almost reluctantly or by accident.
Yeah. Yeah.
Should I keep going or do you want?
Yeah, I mean, so that was the yeah. Thank you. I mean, that's the next question. Like, so, like, what led you to becoming a spiritual director? Like, but it sounds like you already kind of had an awareness about your circumstances. That you, I mean, I think you're selling yourself a little short there, but you were already you're very a great man of God, and I mean, you had such a huge passion for ministry and as far as I could tell you had that same passion that I had and you're very genuine about going into the call and stuff like that but
Hmm.
so I don't know
Yeah.
it's kind of but it sounds like you had some hard time and but you had an awareness to kind of know about where you are at and even though you were asking about where God is and all that stuff but it sounds like you already have pretty strong awareness about your circumstances and what it's contributing to your struggles and stuff.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I felt connected to God. I felt like I was following God through that whole process. I just, again, I think it was that divide, that external self or, the false self, and then what was happening on the inside. And I just was really connected to maybe that version of that external image of myself and wanting that to look really good. And I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment when things weren't as successful as
Mm.
I wanted them to be. So the way I wanted to resolve that with God is I wanted God to make me look good on the outside.
Mm.
And what God basically kept saying to me is, I want you to release that. I
Mm.
want you to release your external, like, and so things are going to go badly, and that's going to be my gift to you to
Mm.
get you to let go of how attached you are to how you look. So I think that just became, and I think as I stayed in pastoral ministry and stayed in spiritual direction, that was the work that the Lord was doing in my own soul, the formation the Lord was doing in my own soul, so that I just started to relax a lot more in pastoral ministry. And then things started to go a little bit better, as I kind of settled down and didn't feel like there was so much pressure on everything going exactly perfectly all the time. But then I stepped into spiritual direction. I was kind of at a place where I was trying to be more intentional about my spiritual practices. And one of the things that I was aware of is I really needed to be going on retreats.
Mm.
And I just wasn't making it happen. And so signed up for, honestly, I signed up for the spiritual direction program initially because I mean, I was in spiritual direction and I had really found a lot of value in it, but I wasn't sure I wanted to get trained to be a spiritual director. I signed up for the program that I did because it was retreat based and it felt like, okay, this is going to be a great opportunity for me to like have disciplined, structured retreats over the next 2 to 3 years. Get away, have somebody else prepare all the content. There'll be continuing education. That'll be good and stimulate. Like I just felt like this is a good like soul care practice for me in the
Mm.
midst of pastoral ministry. And I think through the process, I just enjoyed all that I was learning. And then I started offering spiritual direction to other people and found it to be such a rich space of transformation and
Mm.
so holy, like just entering this incredibly holy space with people. It was just really encouraging, and I just wanted to do it more and more.
I've heard so far from people that either they add spiritual director role on top of their pastoral ministry, or some people have left their pastoral ministry just to do spiritual direction. Sounds like initially you added spiritual direction on top of your pastoral ministry. So, and but then now today you are obviously just focusing on spiritual direction. So, can you tell us a little more about that journey, why you have decided to leave one behind and then choose this?
It's interesting, I, so I am no longer working as a lead pastor at a church. I'm not preaching every Sunday, not leading that in that kind of context, but I still feel like I'm shepherding or pastoring, in the space that I'm in, but it's just in a different format, different context, and we offer different things. And so I think for me, a lot of it just came down to it was a matter of limits. So I like you said, I was still working as a pastor in this church, preaching every week, and I was also then meeting with people one on one, and then this ministry that was offering a clergy centering prayer group in our church that came and asked, "Can we use your space?" I said yes, and I was attending that. I started to get more. There's called Restoration Ministries. I got more connected to them. I joined their collective of spiritual directors, and then they started offering retreats. And the person who was leading that ministry at the time and asked if I would help lead some of those retreats. So I was working as a pastor, seeing people for spiritual direction, and then starting to lead retreats. And it was just, and I have 4 kids, and my wife was working, and it was just like too much. It was just, I was just too busy. I felt like, especially for the spiritual formation stuff, but also for pastoral ministry, I didn't want to be showing up to stuff hurrying all the time and kind of frantic. I wanted to move slower. I wanted to be able to prioritize, spacious times of daily prayer. And if you're just so busy all the time, you can't do that. And so I think that the first desire for me was like, okay, how can I kind of change the way we're doing church and make our church more like just this monastic style spiritual formation ministry? And so I had this vision of like putting yurts. We had this big wooded property behind us, and I was like, let's put yurts along the property, or little tiny homes, and
Oh, that's cool.
we'll be this little oasis in the city, and people can come and do day retreats. And then maybe we can start like morning prayer rhythms throughout the week. And so we can have sort of this, we can be this house of prayer. I was the way I was selling it was like a gym for the soul, like have all these
Yeah.
spiritual practices that people could come and do on our property.
Yeah, I love that. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I loved it too. I was super excited about it. But I just couldn't figure out. I mean, all the people in the church were, I think they were, that sounded cool to them too, but I didn't know how to take the church from where we were to there. And some people, and plenty of people were just not interested. Like that wasn't, we had to keep running Sunday services. We needed to keep, running the youth group. We needed to keep doing the children's ministry. And it was just kind of doing that daily maintenance. And then thinking about this huge shift to a different model of ministry at the same time. It just couldn't happen. And then the pandemic hit,
Yeah.
and it felt like it just felt like it's kind of the nature of ministry. There's just always, fires all over the place. And I don't know if fires is right, but you just have so many responsibilities to have space to think about those big picture things. It's hard, can be hard to find.
Yeah, that would have been an amazing church. Like, I would have loved to be attending your church, and if you had that going on in the back, that would have been really cool. So now that you've been spiritual director for a while, what problem do you feel like you couldn't solve as a pastor that spiritual direction helps you address?
I'll maybe say this 2 ways. I think when I was leaving, the verse that was sort of like front of mind for me, it was at the end of Matthew 23 or something, where Jesus has all the woes to the Pharisees. And at the end of that, one of his woes to the Pharisees is, "Woe to you, or to those of you who call yourself teachers."
Mm,
And then he says, "You have one teacher."
mm,
And he says, "You have one Messiah." And to me, that was like the dynamic. It felt like the way that we were doing church, I was doing a lot of the preaching and teaching, and people really liked the way I preached and teach and taught. And I was wanting this. I was wanting to invite people to discover the teacher, to learn from him and to listen from him. And I just felt like the structure of our worship service was hard to have the focus turn in that way. It needed to be more contemplative. It needed to be more mystical. It needed to facilitate listening. So I was doing a lot of times in my sermon where I would I would pause, and we would have like a minute of silence in the middle of the sermon. And it was like,
yeah.
sometimes that worked, and but that was kind of what I was trying to do. I was trying to get people to stop listening to me and to listen to the Lord as I was speaking. And so that feels like you can kind of do that in a church service. I think if you're creative, you can do it. I think taking the Eucharist facilitates that, incense facility, a lot of the bells and smells type stuff can help facilitate that. Building silence in the worship service can help facilitate that stuff. But it's also in spiritual direction, it's so natural. So I think like stepping into spiritual direction allows me kind of to pursue that purpose in just so easily, because it feels like what spiritual direction is built for. It's built for listening. It's built for paying attention to how is the Spirit present? How is the Spirit speaking and leading in that context? Sorry, you asked me a question. I had two, but what was the question?
So basically, what problem are you solving?
Oh, what problem am I
Yeah,
solving?
or I guess maybe it doesn't have to be a problem, but what do you address? What joy do you have seeing things transform now as a spiritual director
Yeah.
than when you were a pastor?
Yeah. The question that Jesus' disciples ask him, that like, I don't know if this is true, but I can't think off the top of my head if they were asking him, show me how to do this, like show me how to perform a miracle or show me how to have an evangelistic campaign. But they ask him, teach us to pray. And I feel like that feels like one of the primary fruits of spiritual direction is people start to learn how to pray their lives. I don't know if the church service helps people learn how to pray. And so for me, that's like a big gift of spiritual direction is like, I think this is how, like, I think people really, I think there are a lot of people who, if you said, would you like to learn how to like pray, or maybe just would you like to have a better or deeper prayer life? It was a yes, 100% yes. Like, I know I'm supposed to, or like they kind of think like prayer is just like going through your list of like, God help this person, God help this person. So I really think that that's one of the biggest gifts that spiritual directions, or one of the biggest problems that spiritual direction solves for, is teaching people how to pray.
People who are listening to that, what you just said, and then they go to church, they might be a little confused right now. They might be a little lost about what you're talking about, because it's like, well, my pastor preached on Lord's Prayer, and we recite these Lord's Prayer, and then pastors have dissected that, and then they attend maybe like prayer services in the morning or at night, or they go through Lent, and they fast and pray, and so they have all kinds of ways that they practice and learn about how to pray. And then it's also modeled from the pulpit. People are praying and laying hands on people. So what do you mean by that when you say spiritual direction really helps them to pray?
Thomas Keating, what does he say? The greatest obstacle, like, what is it? The greatest obstacle keeping us separated from God is a belief that we are separated from God. And so I think there's just this reality that the presence of God is so intimately near to us at every single moment. Kind of what you're saying, we can hear about like these different like practices, and then we can engage in them. But I think that and those are all very good, and the church can help people engage in those practices. But I think the thing that we want those things to help us move towards, is a greater awareness of the way that God is always with us, and we have this kind of constant ongoing conversation with him, this constant awareness of his presence with us. That happens when we can pray our life, which is sit down and pray through, in conversation with another person, the fight that we have with our spouse, or a question around discernment, and just really explore all the things that we are feeling and wonder about where those things are coming from, and sift and sort and sift and sort, and notice the way that God is actually leading us in big decisions and small, and just the way that God is so much more gracious to us, giving us so many things. Like when you pray your life, you just start discovering all these graces. And then also the way that he guides, like just the Lord's way just appears for us, and we know how to go. We have to notice all the textures, all the different things. And I think that happens as we, I don't know, pray our life is I guess the thing that I keep coming back to. And I also think embracing the mystery, a lot of times it's becoming comfortable with not knowing. The Lord always provides, but sometimes it feels like he doesn't provide. And so there's a mystery to provision. And so like being in spiritual direction, I think sometimes having conversations about that, we're embarrassed to even admit that we think that way. So we can't say it to friends. And then if we're like sitting down in prayer and we have all these doubts and then we think we're not supposed to. So we sort of like try and muster up the white knuckle strength to like believe the right way or pray the right way.
Yeah.
But God is that's not helpful. It's hard to move forward. But in spiritual direction, we can kind of like talk that out. We can process it. We can say it out loud. We can basically come to terms with the fact that maybe we don't know how this is going to go, or maybe we're feeling really insecure, or maybe we're really scared about the future. And then God comes into that. Doesn't necessarily like the uncertainty doesn't go away, but it can be completely transformed. So our life becomes more God saturated, I guess.
And then a lot of times I feel like for me, what I learned is in my faith journey, I'm always speaking. When it's I talk to God, but I'm not taking time to listen. But I think in
Mm,
spiritual direction, that's when I kind of learned to like, God speaks too. Maybe I should stay silent and then let him speak to me. And I think it can be a two-way conversation, but I think in prayer in church, only example that I saw was like just pray, 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 say words fast and repeat words again and again. So yeah, spiritual direction was
100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was really good for me to slow down and just, hey, let God speak. Just
Yeah.
shut up for a second.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's really a great way of naming the distinction is it feels like growing up we're taught that prayer is talking to or at God, and the pivot is just to discover how much God is speaking to us.
And one thing that I want to highlight before we go a little any further, because you said something that I wanted to highlight. You said something about that you really wanted the congregation, the people, to hear from God, not just from you, like or be taught by God, but not just from you. And that really speaks a spiritual maturity, John. I just wanted to just highlight that. I think it's very tempting for as regular preachers and pastors for on the pulpit always talking. We love to talk, right? I mean, we love to teach. We love the sound of our voice sometimes, and just for you to kind of have that awareness and say it's so much sweeter if we learn from our God directly. So you having that genuine desire for your people to hear from God rather than from you, I mean, that speaks such a maturity. And I just wanted to highlight that because not
Mm.
many people have that kind of desire or even awareness.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
How has becoming a spiritual director shaped or changed you personally then?
I mean, kind of on the positive side, I would say it's such a holy space to sit with another person and to listen to them talk about, some of the most intimate parts of their life and to become aware, to like watch a person hear from God. So like they're talking and I ask a question that is hopefully in no way leading. Just a question that helps them stay present to God and what God is doing and saying. And then they hear something and then they talk about it and it changes their life. And I didn't do anything, like I did something because I was there and I asked a question, but really they heard from God themselves.
Mm.
And it is completely like everything changes. Like people who are feeling stressed, experience peace that is deeply meaningful and will change the way they relate to other people. People switch jobs, people move, people make big financial decisions, people reconcile in relationships. I mean, people, get freed from addiction. So like to be in that space and to watch, and it feels like I'm just bearing witness to it. It doesn't feel like I'm the one doing it. It
Mm.
feels like I just get to watch God do it in their lives. It is so holy and is so sacred. And so that is deeply encouraging. And I think it helps me get the way that I've personally been changed is it has changed, my view of who God is, I think, as I see him working in people's lives. And then I would say on the other hand, it is a very obscure ministry.
Yeah.
And so everything that I've just described is happening with nobody else to see it. And so that part of me that wants recognition and applause that you get, like exactly what you were talking about, which you get when you preach a good sermon and people think, oh, that was so much insight. You're so great.
That's right.
Spiritual direction is very absent of that. And so you gotta, I think that part of you kind of withers a little bit. And I have to tend to the restlessness that can cause in me when I feel
Mm.
like I haven't gotten enough like attention. So I think that it has been personally formative for me to go from being a pastor, which is feels like very much the opposite of that. You know, you're kind of up on stage speaking on behalf of God, and people sometimes are criticizing you and sometimes are celebrating you, to this other way of being in ministry that's so much more obscure. It feels like a midwife role, you know, where you're
Yeah.
helping something happen, but you're not at the center of this story at all. And you're really almost irrelevant. It could probably happen without, I mean, I'm not to diminish midwives or anything, but like, for me, you know, like this person, it's very possible. Like I've had people say to me, like, come and do spiritual direction a few times and be like, thanks, this has been great. I've actually had, this has been really, really helpful, but I think I can do this on my own. It's like, okay, yeah, you can pray on your own. I mean, I really value having another person there. So I continue to be in spiritual direction. I think it's helpful because I think sometimes it's hard to stay in prayer when we're completely by ourselves. Like if we're really on a topic and we want to explore it, the questions can be very helpful. And just knowing somebody else is listening and companioning us through it is really helpful. But yeah, I feel at some level like I'm not particular, like I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
And that obscurity, you know, it causes that part of the flesh that wants to get attention and approval and affection. It can wither it a little bit, and that's good. Like I actually think that's really good.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, that speaks to how that you did a good job of letting them know, hey, you can't talk to God,
Yeah.
and you don't need me. At some point, I think we are always trying to reintroduce people to God, right? And
Hmm.
then you don't need me to have that conversation. Once you have the channel opened up again, and you're talking with God, and yeah, you don't need me. So
Hmm.
it sounds like your perception has changed quite a bit. You grew. So now being in that position today, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the church as a spiritual director looking at our body? Yeah, what is the biggest challenge facing the church today?
Yeah, so you sent me some of these questions, so I kind of looked through some of them, and this was the one that really stood out to me
Mm,
that I felt like I just sat with and kind of wondered about. And I actually find this question very hard to answer. I think at some level, you know, it's the same challenges that it has always been. What does it say in First or Second John? The flesh, the world, and the devil. You know, something like that. Like very a little bit generic, but kind of those kind of eternal foes. And then there's also ways that I could answer it, you know, that feels like super relevant, like kids sports, consumerism, you know, stuff like that. So I kind of struggled to name it, but I think if I had to choose, I think probably the place that I would go back to is what I was talking about before is around prayer. My sense is generally as I interact with people who are committed Christians, very active in the church, doing a lot, really wanting to follow God. They're volunteering a lot. They're going to church regularly. They're in small groups. They're in Bible studies. And by and large, I feel like they don't pray.
mm,
Or their prayer is sort of like a forced quiet time where they're maybe following like the Acts model or something. And it feels like it's kind of something they have to muster up a lot of will to
yeah.
like get through. And I think the invitation is for a deeper and richer and more inviting prayer life that has like a whole range of different experiences and is very integrated into our real lives and our real emotions and our real needs and the real conflicts we're having. That's super integrated. So something like that.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm a spiritual director myself, I know exactly what you're talking about. But kind of putting myself back to that church when I was, attending church, and but if I were to just hear that from that point, I would have felt like guilt already. Like, oh yeah, I'm not praying enough.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's not it.
right? Like, yeah, I forgot to pray for my wife. I forgot. I'm not
Yeah.
praying for my children. I'm not praying for my neighborhood, my neighbor. So, what do you mean? Maybe this is a good time for me to kind of ask the next question of like, so is there a practice prayer that you can recommend? Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so
Prayer.
I would say if I were to recommend a practice in prayer, it would like, and this is not probably for everybody. For me personally, the most transformative and helpful prayer practice has been centering prayer, and I practice it consistently. It's basically you just sit in silence. You set a timer for 20 or 30 minutes, or if you're just starting out, you do it for less to kind of ease into it, and you just turn your attention to how God loves you.
Mm.
Consent to the fact that he has chosen to love you apart from anything you can say or do. And usually what happens for everybody is as soon as you close your eyes and settle into a space and decide that you're just going to sit in silence in consent to the fact that God is loving you just because that's what he wants to do and nothing that you have to do to get him to love you, your mind starts to wander and you have distracted thoughts. And for me, a lot of these things are worries or fears that come up or conversations I've had earlier in the day that I'm wondering, oh, did I sound bad when I said that? So I'm kind of thinking about how I look.
Mm.
Then I start to think about like, how am I doing in this prayer thing? Like, am I doing it right? Like, oh, wait, like, am I becoming more aware? Like, am I really good at this? Like, is God being gracious? I just have this kind of constant running dialogue about myself.
Mm.
And so then part of the work of centering prayer is just letting that go and just returning to this gracious center where God's choice to be with me, to love me, and to be active in my life isn't dependent upon me. And I just like can, and it allows me to let go of all the thoughts I have that are centered on my self-centered way of existing and just consent to the fact that God is like overwhelming me with his presence and love. And it's just that practice of doing it over and over and over and over again bears the fruit, I think, in my daily life of like deep, deep peacefulness and hopefulness and freedom, so much more freedom. So like that's a prayer practice. And so usually what I do is I do centering prayer and then I move into, I'll read some scripture or but even then when I'll start praying my life, like it becomes more like things I wonder about, like the way that I hold something. I'll
Mm.
become aware of something happened this last weekend. And I became aware like, oh, I feel kind of hurt about that.
Mm.
And so I kind of just give my attention to it and I bring it into the Lord's presence and just sort of like hold it before the Lord. And there's just this like something mysterious is happening at a deep level. And I'm not like explaining it to God,
Yeah.
but some communion happens and somehow I gain some deeper understanding about what that is. And then I feel better. And it's not always like magic, like taking medicine, but now I feel like I'm moving into my week. And because of the time I spent in prayer, this hurt that happened over the weekend when I was at this event isn't going to control me. It's not going to dictate how I'm showing up or the next time I see this person. Like it's like changed me and I've let go of something and I've gained some new insight into this other aspect of what was going on in the context. And so like praying that, like because I've had the time to pray, I feel like that wound kind of has started to heal a little bit and I have some wisdom about what was going on in the broader context and I kind of can move forward into that in a non-reactionary way. So good. Like I'm
Yeah.
so glad I was able to do that. It feels like such a gift.
I mean, yeah, I mean that silence you're talking about, it brings us that awareness, and then for us to kind of be able to catch some of the things that we should be paying attention to, and then we become a little bit more aware of like, why did I act or behave this way? And so there is definitely that silence that can lead to reflection and stuff like that. But I think when I was first learning, it's kind of embarrassing for me to admit, but even as a pastor, a former pastor, I went to seminary, but I never heard of honestly centering prayer until like a few years ago, until I got into contemplative spirituality myself. So I think some people who are in evangelicalism right now, like in typical church today, I think Protestant church especially right now, we have not talked about this kind of prayer practices. So this, even though you say centering prayer, and we know what that means now, but I think a lot of people still have no idea what that is. And then when you say silence, like, what do you mean? Like, just sit here silently? Like, what kind of practice is that? Like, I think for Protestants, it's such a new concept. But is this a new concept? Because I think I get this question a lot. It's like, isn't this Hinduism? Isn't this Buddhism? Isn't this Zen? Isn't this what they talk about? Are we becoming New Age? So what do you have you heard that? And how would you respond to that kind of question?
Yeah, so I would say I've heard some people talk about how the goal of some of that New Age Buddhism, Zen, whatever, is maybe like emptiness, and the goal here is not emptiness.
Mm,
So maybe there's a little bit of difference there. And in terms of it's like, where does it come from? I mean, it's certainly been a practice that the church has been using for hundreds and thousands of years. And I think you can base it a lot in how Jesus teaches his disciples to pray.
mm,
They say Jesus teaches to pray, and he says, go into your inner room and close the door. And
that's right.
nobody had private rooms, and they certainly didn't have private closets in their private rooms,
That's right.
So the inner room that he's talking about is your interior life.
Mm,
And he says, if you're thinking like, oh, what are the words to say? He says, don't babble like the pagans who think they will be heard for their many words. So there's just
that's
this
right.
release from you needing to use words. And there's this, and then he promises, in that parable, you who are evil, don't you, if your kid asks for a fish, you give him a fish, you don't give him a
Hmm.
rock or a snake or scorpion or whatever. How much more will the Father in heaven? So just this like recognition that God's posture towards us is abundantly gracious. Like we don't have to do anything. Like he's just like delighted to meet us and to be with us. So we can, or then the last one I'll name is just the publican and the Pharisee and the tax collector. It's clear that Jesus says our previous actions don't prevent us from drawing near to God in prayer. So nothing you have done in the past is preventing you from getting intimate with God. No words are required, and you don't have to go to any special place except that place where you live with the Lord. So find someplace quiet in your house where just you're not going to be distracted and sit still and recognize, because a lot of times you have those thoughts like, who am I, or I did this, I don't deserve it. It's just those are everything. It's just that's where you're letting go of all of those thoughts in order to turn in faith, I think, and consent to the fact that I don't have to do anything to get God to be with me. He's just here. He has made the decision to love me. And so for me, that's what the centering prayer is. It's this consenting to the gospel.
Mm,
It's consenting to the good news that this is not up to me, that God is just way more loving, way more gracious, not dependent on past sins or actions or words or anything. And I just sit still. I just
mm,
sit still and consent, consenting to his presence, consenting to his action, and every thought that's coming to me that's basically beckoning me to fix my life up for God, do better,
yeah.
make yourself look better, say the right words. I just let that go and consent in the silence to the fact that God has made a decision to love me.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
So where
And
do you see now spiritual direction fitting into the future of the church?
well, so this is actually, I think, an interesting question. And I think, you mentioned Eugene Peterson, where he talked about one of the core tasks of a pastor is spiritual direction. And one of the things that I wrestled with when I was a pastor is, can I offer spiritual direction to my parishioners and then be in a leadership team meeting with them or oversee them in staff?
Mm-hmm.
Or ask them to lead a small group and then give them feedback when I know what's going on in their life. And so I feel like it's good to just be aware of what healthy boundaries in spiritual direction look like. And so so that's sort of where I am right now. Our ministry feels very much like a parachurch organization. It sort of exists on the side, and most of the people in our ministry are going to church somewhere or involved in a faith community somewhere. And if I feel like, depending, like there are certain people who will come and ask me to do spiritual, and I'll say no just because of the boundary issues or the dual relationship stuff. And so I think that, and I think the way that the Catholics do it, where it feels like I don't know this for sure, but my sense is that the place where people oftentimes get spiritual direction is at monasteries. And so they go away on retreat, or they go and they meet with a monk or a nun or somebody in that context and get spiritual direction. I think that like ministries that sort of function along that model, I think I could see like it's not quite like your local congregation, it's this dedicated house of prayer where these people have given their lives to a life of prayer, and then their service to the church is to pray with people in spiritual direction. And that's sort of, if you were to ask me like, how do you see it playing out? I would love to see something like that play out.
Yeah, it is really tricky, isn't it? In our training of spiritual directors, we talk about this a lot, and then this always brings interesting conversation because some some pastors are attending a cohort to be trained to become spiritual director, And then our practice has been that when they're practicing to be a spiritual director, we have practicum hours that they have to do. So they are offering spiritual direction to people. And then we always say, hey, when you're finding a directee, or please try not to offer it to your congregants.
Yeah.
And then they have hard time with that. I'm like, where am I gonna find people?
Hmm.
Like, and I'm doing this for my church. So, and going back to Eugene Peterson's comment, obviously some time ago, spiritual direction, giving spiritual or listening, holy listening was part of pastoral role.
Hmm.
And so it was interesting conversation. Why are we all of a sudden telling the pastors who are becoming spiritual directors or adding this ministry on top of theirs? Why are we telling them to not do it or not offer it? I'm not really telling them not to do it, but we're
Yeah.
discouraging them during the training time
Hmm.
not to, because you're alluding to it, power dynamic, right? As a
Hmm.
pastor, you have authority over their lives, and maybe you know something about them or their struggles. So when we are offering spiritual direction, we might be influenced by what we know,
Yeah.
and then also position of power. So instead of rather than allowing them to connect with God and listen to God, there's always that temptation for us to kind of give suggestion or,
Hmm.
hey, maybe you should be doing this and that. But maybe a lot of people who are listening to this may not know that that's not what we do. Like, we're not trying to give you advice. We're just simply guiding you to have a conversation with God so that you can listen to God. So we try not to play that role of that typical pastor who often gives a lot of advice, right? Like, hey, I think you should be working on this. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? But that's not what we're doing. So it gets a little bit uh, interesting, because back in the day when pastors were doing holy listening really well, obviously they were doing that, but all of a sudden, why are we now telling them not, or at least from our program, we try to encourage them not to give spiritual direction, separate it, have some boundaries with their congregants. So, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, why is there a transition here?
I think you're articulating it really well. Just there's a tension there, and there's the potential for harm, and but it's not a hard and fast rule, and so it's something that's really good to like pay attention to and pray about. When I was still working at the church, I was offering spiritual direction, for people in the congregation, and I was just trying to be very attentive to it, and it would like I was very, and it's primarily then it was how I was interacting with them out. I wouldn't acknowledge it. I wouldn't tell people that I was meeting with them, and then I would just check in with them on what their comfort level is. I have one person I meet with who's like a really good friend, and so I'm always kind of wondering, like, is this still okay? And so I'll ask him, and it kind of feels like this one's more in his court, like he gets to decide if he continues to feel comfortable. And so I think it's hard to say that there's a rule here. At least that's my perspective. And I think you're right. I think it does. I'm kind of sympathetic to the Eugene Peterson thing. So I do think that this should be a core thing. But I also think, like, I know when I was going through spiritual direction, I felt like I started, like our leadership team meetings, or like, which is the equivalent of board of elders, increasingly we're starting to feel like group spiritual direction for the church. It felt like our role was to listen for how the Spirit is leading the church. And so the being trained as a spiritual director, and like I said, it started to shape the way that I was preaching. So I feel like the application of spiritual direction as sort of a facilitator for broader listening is like relevant in so many ways to pastoral ministry.
Wow. Thank you for mentioning that, John, because like the hybrid or the healthy model or balance is exactly what you're talking about. Becoming practicing more of a group spiritual direction. Some people who are listening to this may not understand the difference right now, but yes, I think there's something beautiful about group spiritual direction. Basically, we are kind of facilitating a space where everyone is listening to God and Holy Spirit, and instead of us. Everybody kind of busy competing to give the best advice possible or best word possible. We're still asking good questions so that, whoever is sharing, whoever is in the center of that conversation or sharing, that person gets to hear from God, and all of us are or becoming a sense practicing spiritual direction. So I think a pastor who picks up this skill or this kind of role and then become a type of facilitator that can create group spiritual direction kind of setting in your staff group or in your congregation, I think that is really ideal from my perspective too. So thank you for mentioning that. Do you have any comment or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I no, I hear you saying that, and I feel affirmation. Like it feels so basic and obvious. Like the leadership team should be like the church it's Jesus's church, you know. So you should be listening for his voice when you're
Yeah.
trying to lead, you know. So it feels like that's the whole role and work of that group. But it can be easy to forget that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I agree with you what you're saying.
So I hope this wasn't discouraging for any pastors who were considering becoming a spiritual director. I'm like,
No, hope
yeah,
not. Yeah.
hope not. So what advice would you give to any pastors who are considering to become a spiritual director or adding this to their ministry, or they're being felt called to something new, and then spiritual direction is one of the things that they're considering? What advice would you have for any pastors who are considering this?
I think for me, it's been a slow, long transition. You know, you just listen. If this is the way that God is leading you, I think you trust and you follow one step at a time. I don't know that there's any hard and fast rules about it. So I think, you know, for me, you know, I ended up leaving the church that I was working at in 2021 so I could give my attention fully to this ministry that I'm in now, spiritual formation, spiritual direction ministry. But I could see that my life could have unfolded differently where I stayed at the church. And so I think for pastors, it doesn't mean like, I think you don't have to leave your church. And I think you don't have to leave it right away. There's so many ways that it can unfold. And for me personally, like the whole getting trained and just entering into the spiritual formation world just has been so deeply encouraging for my own personal soul. And I think it's been really helpful for me in terms of the way I lead in ministry and function in ministry. I would love, I think I like really enjoyed seminary. I was academically inclined. I was like I mentioned, like that was my desire at that time, was to learn. And so like that season of my life, I loved the study. But ideally, it would be great if a lot of the spiritual formation and spiritual direction training could be more integrated into a seminary experience, because this feels like pretty foundational for just being in ministry.
Yeah. And I also want to tweak my question a little bit, because I also don't want to give false impression that only former pastors or pastors today are qualified to become spiritual director. All my spiritual directors that I have received direction from, they all have been non-pastors. They're just spiritual directors, but they're not pastors. So does change anything? Like if there's anyone that is thinking about either becoming a pastor or spiritual director, do you have any words? Because I think I have met some people who are like, they're right at that junction. And
Mm-hmm.
they're either deciding, do I go to seminary to become a pastor, or do I go down the certificate or some other training route to become a spiritual director? Do you have any thoughts on that? Sorry, I put you on the spot. 'Cause that
Yeah,
question
I'm
was,
trying to think like what are thoughts that I could give that are like generally applicable, because it's obviously so it's going to be so unique to each individual situation.
or what would help them discern which way to go if there's anybody that is considering either or.
I don't. So this is the thing that's so interesting is I think the world is so different than when we went to seminary.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it felt like at that time you could just kind of have this call to ministry and just sign up and go to seminary and then graduate and try and get a job, just like a kind of a general graduate school.
Yeah,
I don't know if that works anymore.
yeah,
I legitimately don't know.
yeah,
So I don't know what people's process is like for seminary. Like if you're already working in a church and it's required for ordination, or you feel like you're like being asked to preach more and you just don't have the skills to do the exegesis and preaching, and you want to like hone those skills. And I don't even, and again, I don't think I'm even familiar enough with what seminary looks like if they're doing the same thing they were doing 25 years ago.
yeah.
So I think I'm having a little bit of a hard time, but the one thing I guess I will add is formation program that I went through for spiritual direction was so helpful for me. It was so helpful. I just personally very formative for my soul and help facilitate. I mean, a lot of stuff was happening in my life at that time. So, it's kind of the work of God through a lot of different ways, but the training program itself was really helpful. So it's hard for me not to kind of advocate for that for every single person who's even a little bit open to it.
Can you give like quick example of like what was so helpful about it?
Being with people who deeply believed in the Lord's presence with us right now, and then leading in this way that was constantly inviting us to turn our attention to how God is with us. And just, I think, growing more and more in confidence, like, oh, God is really with me. So basic, but I think I think I was just missing that to a certain degree. Intellectually, I could have said it, but just experientially, it's life changing.
Thank you, John. This has been so enlightening and so good. So if people want to receive spiritual direction from you, how do they find you? So can you talk in two ways? Like, how do they find you if they want to receive spiritual direction from you, or if they want to partner with you? What does that look like?
I'm in Minnesota. Our ministry is called restorationmn.org, the MN for Minnesota. We're a pretty local ministry, so if you're in the Minnesota area and you wanted to connect, you can contact me through the website. There's ways to send us an email or reach out. And if you wanted to get spiritual direction, you can probably reach out through that as well. I do some virtual spiritual direction too. And if you want to give a donation, you can do that at our ministry as well. I'm happy to receive donations from anybody.
It's all in that website.
All at that website, yeah.
Good to know. And then you spoke of the just to kind of give a shout out to where you got your training. If anyone wants to kind of follow your suit and it's like, hey, I'm in Minnesota area and I want to kind of check out this place where you got your training. Where is that, and how do they find that place?
So the place that I got trained, I was not in Minnesota. It was through the organization called Leadership Transformations, and they have a spiritual director training program called SELA. And it was retreat based, and so it's kind of all over. The one that I went to was in Arizona, and so that was really appealing to me, being from Minnesota, to be able to go on multiple retreats a year in Arizona, kind of go to the desert, get out of in the winter, the cold here, and
Yeah, that sounds nice.
yeah, it was great.
What is there a website?
Yeah, leadership transform. If you just Google leadership transformations and go, I can't remember exactly. It's like leadershiptransformations.org probably.
Okay.
And then the program Sela, or Selah, at the end of the psalm, they're in the, for pause. And it's the Sela pause, and it's just this invitation. Someone talks. Well, let's
Sounds good.
pause and go into silence and sit with that a little bit.
Thanks, John. This was so good for me. Yeah, obviously, it's been a while, so it's so
Fun to
good
catch up.
yeah,
Yeah.
come to catch up as well. So I really appreciate your vulnerability, honesty, and then I'm so glad that both of us are now in this ministry as well. Like it's so incredible that after so many years that we kind of ended up in a similar place, and that we're going through similar convictions and so on and so forth. So God must be behind it all. So praise God.
Thanks, Dan. This
Yeah.
has been fun.
Yeah. Thanks, man.